We are looking at some really rigorous textual analyses drawn from works like A Matter of Truth and The Church of the Firstborn.
They are very intense reads.
They really are. These texts ask us to basically throw out all our assumptions and look at the actual grammar, the logic, and the theology of ultimate evil. So our mission today is to explore this massive historical debate.
Is the entity referred to as Satan a literal physical being or merely a psychological metaphor?
Right, and we're going to trace this from the microscopic inner workings of the human heart, look at the linguistic clues hidden in the grammar of Genesis, and then scale all the way up to ancient cosmic dragons.
Yeah, we'll end up with a literal tactical war in heaven. But before we dive into the mechanics of those arguments, I really need to set the parameters for how we are approaching this deep dive today.
Yeah, definitely a good idea.
Because the sources we are analyzing today are dense. I mean, they deal with highly charged, highly specific theological doctrine. They specifically name Christadelphian and Roman Catholic doctrines regarding the nature of sin and evil. So I want to be explicitly clear for you listening right now. Our goal here is not to validate, endorse, or debunk any specific religious viewpoint.
We're not picking sides here.
Not at all. We are just analyzing the text as it is presented to the reader. We are unpacking the fascinating textual, linguistic, and logical arguments that the authors of these sources make regarding the nature of evil.
We are just here for the architecture of the argument.
Exactly.
And to understand that architecture, we really have to start with the foundation that our sources are trying to dismantle, because they spend a significant amount of time outlining a very specific viewpoint.
The idea that the devil is just a metaphor for us.
Yeah, let's look at what the text identifies as the Christadelphian viewpoint, though, this metaphorical interpretation pops up in various other philosophical schools as well.
It does. And the core of this metaphorical belief is that Satan is not a literal, living, breathing entity, and there is no fallen angel orchestrating tragedy on earth. Instead, the term Satan, which in its original linguistic roots simply translates to adversary, is just used as a euphemism.
A euphemism for what, exactly?
It is a stand-in for sin itself. Or more specifically, it represents the internal, lustful, destructive desires inherent within the human heart.
Okay, let's pull this into a modern context for you so we can really see the mechanics of how this works. It sounds like the difference between catching a physiological virus from the outside versus having a software glitch already coded into your computer.
That is a perfect way to look at it.
So this viewpoint is essentially arguing that evil is just our own bad code.
Yeah, that analogy actually isolates the exact mechanism this viewpoint relies on. Think about it. If you catch a computer virus, an external agent has invaded your system from the outside, right?
Right, you clicked a bad link. You're the victim.
Exactly. You are the victim of a malicious third party. But if you have a software glitch, the problem is inherent to your own operating system.
It was there from the moment you booted up the computer.
Yes. This metaphorical view argues that humanity has a software glitch. And because ancient peoples didn't have the psychological vocabulary we have today, they personified that glitch.
They gave it a name, Satan.
Precisely.
So under this framework, when you read ancient texts talking about Jesus destroying Satan or prophets battling demonic forces, they aren't talking about physical combat.
Not at all. The sources explain that under this metaphorical logic, when the scriptures talk about destroying Satan, they mean destroying the very concept of sin.
So it's an internal conquest.
Right, it's totally internal. The proponents of this view rely heavily on specific textual anchors, particularly verses found in the book of James.
Oh yeah, James has some strong words on this.
He does. James writes that a person is tempted when they are drawn away by their own lusts and enticed.
Their own lusts, meaning it's coming from inside the house.
Exactly. The argument is that temptation doesn't come from a whispering monster sitting on your shoulder. It comes purely from our own internal desires.
Which, psychologically speaking, is a massive paradigm shift.
It really is.
I mean, if there is no external whispering monster, that entirely shifts the burden of responsibility. Like, if the devil made me do it, I have a built-in scapegoat.
Right, you can just say you're a pawn in a cosmic chess match between good and evil.
Yeah, exactly. But this internal view changes all that.
And that is the philosophical appeal of the metaphorical view for a lot of people. If there is no literal adversary, humanity holds 100% of the agency for the world's evil.
100%.
Every war, every theft, every act of cruelty is purely the result of human choice and human desire.
Wow. It places the full weight of moral responsibility squarely on human shoulders.
There is no external tempter to blame.
It's heavy, but it also gives humans complete ownership of their actions, which is kind of empowering in a way.
It is.
But our sources clearly don't buy into this software glitch theory.
No, they do not.
In fact, they argue that treating evil as an abstract concept hits a massive insurmountable wall when you start reading the rest of the text, literally.
The authors of our sources force the reader to confront a very practical, almost logistical question. If the devil is just an abstract concept, how exactly do you punish a concept?
Yeah, you can't throw an idea into a jail cell.
Well,
you can't set a software glitch on fire.
The author of AMatterOfTruth is demanding structural consistency from the text here. If you read the punishments described in the latter parts of the scripture, like the lake of fire or eternal chains, as literal physical events, you cannot have a metaphorical defendant.
That makes total sense. A living enemy, a physical being with actual agency, can be punished.
Exactly. An abstract concept of human lust cannot be locked in a bottomless pit for 1,000 years, which is what's described in the book of Revelation.
That makes sense from a narrative logistics standpoint, like the story just doesn't work otherwise. But the sources don't just rely on the logistics of the punishment, do they?
No, they go much deeper. They start breaking down the theological paradoxes that this metaphorical view creates.
Yeah, and they present several of these paradoxes to dismantle the internal metaphor theory. Let's start with the one about the heart, what we can call the new heart paradox.
This is a fascinating argument. In various parts of the biblical text, God promises to give believers a new heart or a new spirit.
Which represents a regenerated, cleansed spiritual core.
Yes, a totally clean slate. So the author points out a glaring contradiction here. If Satan is just the sin that dwells in the human heart, why would God give believers a new heart where sin supposedly still dwells?
Okay, let me make sure I'm following the logic here for you listening. If the hardware, like the heart, is entirely replaced and made brand new, the old software glitch shouldn't still be running.
It should be completely gone.
But believers obviously still experience temptation.
Right, everyone does.
So if the heart is new, but the temptation is still there, the temptation cannot be coming from inside the new heart.
That is the exact logical progression the author uses. If the new heart is meant to be pure, but the temptation is purely internal, then the new heart is basically flawed from the factory.
It's shipped broken.
Exactly. The internal metaphor theory requires the new heart to be defective immediately upon delivery.
Which contradicts the whole idea of it being a new, pure heart.
Right. Therefore, the author argues, the temptation must be an external virus, continually trying to infect the new system. It cannot be internal.
Okay, I see how they are using the text's own internal rules to box the metaphorical view into a corner.
It's a very structurally sound argument.
It is. But the sources bring up an even bigger trap, which to me seems like the fatal blow to the metaphorical argument, at least within Orthodox theology. Let's talk about the Jesus paradox.
Yes. This is where the theological stakes become incredibly high.
Because it deals with the nature of Jesus himself.
Exactly. The metaphorical view states that Satan is simply a personification of our own sinful nature, our own internal lusts.
Right, the bad code.
But the text explicitly states, in multiple gospel accounts, that Jesus was tempted by Satan in the wilderness.
So if we substitute the definitions, if Satan equals internal sinful lust, and Jesus was tempted by Satan, then
Jesus must have been tempted by his own internal sinful lust.
Wow, which forces a conclusion that breaks almost every branch of Orthodox Christian theology.
It would mean that Jesus possessed a sinful, lustful nature.
Which is a huge theological red flag.
Massive. The author points out that if you want to maintain the core theological belief that Jesus was sinless and perfect, that temptation in the desert had to come from an external, literal source.
Because he couldn't tempt himself with dark desires he didn't have.
Exactly. It could not have been a projection of his own internal dark desires. That's the only way the math works.
The logic is incredibly tight, but the sources don't just stay in these high-level philosophical puzzles. They get incredibly granular. I mean, they go down to the level of ancient Hebrew pronouns.
The grammatical argument from Genesis chapter 3 is one of the most compelling pieces of evidence the authors present for a literal entity.
Let's set the scene for this one.
We have to look at the immediate aftermath of the consumption of the forbidden fruit in the Garden of Eden. God is confronting the parties involved and handing down the consequences.
The sentencing hearing, essentially.
Right. When God speaks to the woman, Eve, the text uses direct personal pronouns. God says, "I will greatly multiply your sorrow. In sorrow you shall bring forth children."
your and you.
Yes. The author points out that God is speaking directly to a real, literal, living being. The grammar reflects a conversation between two entities with agency.
Right. Nobody debates whether Eve is supposed to be read as a literal character in this specific narrative. We all agree Eve is treated as a person there.
Exactly. Then the author points to the judgment of the serpent, which happens in the very same breath. God uses those exact same literal pronouns when addressing the serpent.
He talks to the serpent the same way he talks to Eve.
Word for word grammatically. Because you have done this, you are cursed. Upon your belly shall you go.
Wow.
The author's argument is that the grammatical structure of the Hebrew does not randomly shift from literal historical dialogue to abstract poetry mid-sentence.
That would be a really weird writing choice.
Right. The grammar treats the serpent with the exact same literal physical presence and agency as it treats the woman.
Because you don't say, because you have done this, you are cursed to a concept.
You really don't.
Like if my computer crashes, I might yell at it, sure.
We've all been there.
Yeah, but I don't assign it moral agency. I don't hold the software glitch legally accountable.
You don't put the laptop on trial.
Exactly. So the author is saying the grammar itself forces us to view the serpent as a being with intent.
The grammar requires a subject that is capable of premeditation and action.
But we need to look at why this matters so much to the authors of our sources. Why are they fighting so hard to prove that the initial temptation in the garden came from an external entity?
It connects to the dismantling of a massive theological pillar, the doctrine of original sin.
Original sin, let's define that for you, just so we're all on the same page. This is the idea that humanity inherited a broken nature from Adam and Eve.
It's the idea that we are born with the software glitch already installed.
Right. It's heavily associated with Augustine, right?
Yeah. Yes. And it forms a major part of Roman Catholic doctrine, as well as many Protestant traditions. It posits that humans are born inherently broken, carrying the guilt, or at least the corrupted nature of Adam's initial disobedience.
So we are born guilty, or at least born wanting to do bad things.
But the authors of these sources argue vehemently against original sin. They argue that humans are actually born neutral, entirely capable of choosing good or evil.
Okay, I see where this is going. If humans are born neutral, they don't have the internal glitch.
Precisely. If we aren't born inherently sinful, if Adam and Eve were created perfect and neutral, then the initial temptation in the Garden of Eden could not possibly have come from within.
Because there was no within to come from.
Right. If Satan is just a metaphor for human lust, but Adam and Eve were created without lust, the metaphorical theory collapses instantly.
The literal external entity is mathematically required for their theology to function.
The external entity is the absolute only way to introduce the virus to a perfect system.
Okay, but this brings up a huge issue for a modern reader. If we accept that the grammar and the theology force this to be a literal entity, we hit a massive biological roadblock.
A snake anatomy.
Right. Are we really supposed to believe that Eve was having a casual conversation with a literal scaly reptile? Because if so, the anatomy of that encounter makes zero sense. Snakes don't have vocal cords capable of human speech.
And this is where reading ancient texts requires us to be incredibly precise with language, and where we have to separate modern biological classifications from ancient behavioral descriptions.
So it wasn't a biological snake.
Our sources ask us to look much closer at the word serpent in Genesis 3. Did she hear words coming from a biological reptile, or did she hear words whispered into her mind?
Okay, if you are hearing this and thinking, okay, a talking snake is where I draw the line on literalism, you aren't alone.
It's a common stumbling block.
But the text uses an analogy that I think bridges this gap perfectly. Think about how we use language today. If you call a treacherous coworker a snake in the grass, everyone knows exactly what you mean.
Right, you aren't calling them a reptile.
Exactly. We all know that person is a real, literal human being. You are angry at a real person who did a real thing with real agency. But they aren't anatomically a reptile. They don't have scales.
The animal is a metaphor for their character.
Yes. It describes their cunning, their betrayal, their hidden nature.
And taking that a step further, the animal imagery is used to describe a behavioral reality, not a biological one. The sources argue that this is exactly what is happening in Genesis. The entity is literal, but the description is metaphorical.
That makes a lot of sense.
Let's unpack the linguistic evidence they provide to support this, looking at both the Greek translation used in the New Testament and the original Hebrew of the Old Testament.
Okay, let's start with the Greek. How does the New Testament refer back to this entity?
The Greek word used in the New Testament for serpent is ophisi.
Bophis.
Yes. The sources note that this word doesn't strictly mean a biological snake in every context. In classical Greek literature, it is often translated as an artful or cunning malicious person.
Really? So it's a title of character.
Exactly. Just like calling someone a fox means they are sly, calling an entity an Orpheus means it is malicious and cunning.
Okay, that makes sense for the Greek translation, which was written much later. But what about the original Hebrew in Genesis? That is the source code for the entire narrative.
The Hebrew word translated as serpent is nakash.
Nakash.
And the root of this word is fascinating. It means to whisper, to hiss, or to enchant.
To enchant.
Yes, it has strong connotations of spell casting, divination, or mesmerizing someone with words.
Wow.
The text suggests that Eve wasn't looking down at a biological reptile moving its jaw. Instead, she was being mesmerized by thoughts being whispered into her mind or spoken to her by a real spiritual being who was acting as an enchanter.
A whispering enchanter?
Yeah.
Psychologically, that is so much more insidious than a talking animal.
It really is.
I mean, a talking animal is a fairy tale. A whispering enchanter is psychological warfare. It's an entity planting ideas, twisting logic, enchanting the mind.
It's a much darker image.
It is. But I have to push back here because this creates a glaring contradiction with the rest of the text.
Go ahead. What's the contradiction?
If it's not a literal biological animal, what do we do with the curse?
The curse in Genesis.
Yeah, Genesis 3.14 explicitly says to the serpent, "Upon your belly you shall go, and dust shall you eat all the days of your life."
Right.
If this entity isn't a snake, why is God punishing it by taking away its legs and making it slither on the ground? That sounds incredibly specific to reptilian anatomy. How does the author explain away a physical biological curse?
It is the most logical counterargument to the enchanter theory, and the sources spend considerable time anticipating it.
So what's their defense?
They argue that if the serpent is a descriptive title for a cunning spiritual being, then the curse must also be understood through the lens of a figure of speech.
Wait, so God is using poetry during a sentencing hearing?
In a way, yes. Think about the phrase eating dust or biting the dust. Even in modern English, when we say a team bit the dust, we don't mean they literally consumed dirt off the field.
Right, it means they lost.
It means they suffered a humiliating defeat, to be brought low. The author argues that upon your belly you shall go symbolizes a state of being, not an anatomical alteration.
So it's not about losing legs.
No, it is a metaphor for ultimate humiliation and degradation. God is not talking about reptilian legs. God is telling this proud, majestic spiritual being that it will be cast down, stripped of its honor, and made the lowest of the low.
Okay, that actually tracks with the snake in the grass analogy we used earlier.
How so?
Well, if you tell that treacherous coworker, "I'm going to make you crawl," you don't mean you are going to physically break their kneecaps.
Right, you aren't threatening physical violence.
No. You mean you are going to humble them professionally. You are going to destroy their standing in the company.
Precisely. The physical imagery represents a positional reality. It is a spiritual demotion described through physical, earthy metaphors. The entity lost its standing, not its limbs.
So the serpent in the garden is a descriptive title for a cunning, whispering spiritual entity. A real being, but not a literal animal.
Correct.
But this creates a fascinating narrative arc because as we move out of Genesis and into the other books of the biblical text, this entity's description doesn't stay small.
It doesn't. It scales up dramatically.
It goes from a garden snake to something massive, ancient, and terrifying.
We leave the intimacy of the garden and move into the cosmic scale of the Book of Job, which is widely considered by scholars to be one of the oldest texts in the biblical canon.
Right, Job is incredibly ancient.
And Job introduces us to a creature called the Leviathan.
Leviathan. Job chapter 41 is an incredibly dramatic piece of literature.
It's basically a monologue from God.
Yeah, God is basically flexing his creative muscle, asking Job a series of rhetorical questions to show how small humanity is compared to the forces of the universe. And God says, "Can you draw out Leviathan with a hook?"
As in, you can't go fishing for this thing.
Exactly. The text describes this unstoppable, impenetrable, fire-breathing sea monster. Weapons just bounce off it. It makes the deep boil like a pot.
It's a terrifying image.
But the key verse for our sources is Job 41, verse 34, which calls the Leviathan the king over all the children of pride.
A king of pride.
Who is this creature? Historically, scholars have tried to say it's a really big crocodile or a hippopotamus or maybe even a cultural memory of a dinosaur.
Many naturalistic interpretations have tried to identify the Leviathan as a biological animal to ground the text in mundane reality.
Right, they want it to be a normal zoo animal.
But our sources argue definitively that Leviathan is not an animal. Leviathan is Satan.
They connect it directly.
They connect the dots using another prophet, Isaiah. In Isaiah chapter 27, verse 1, the text explicitly links the Leviathan to 3 distinct titles.
What are they?
It calls Leviathan the piercing serpent, that crooked serpent, and the dragon.
The serpent and the dragon. So the text itself is explicitly linking the whispering enchanter from the garden in Genesis to the unstoppable, prideful monster in Job.
Yes, the author is synthesizing these texts to show that serpent, dragon, and Leviathan are not biological classifications of different animals that God created on the 5th day.
They aren't just big reptiles.
They are varying metaphorical descriptions of the same literal, powerful, spiritual entity, the adversary, the king of pride.
But the sources take this a step further, and this is where we need to tread carefully, because it moves from ancient poetry into what modern readers might immediately dismiss as science fiction.
It does get pretty out there.
Because they analyze the original Hebrew word, Leviathan.
Yes, the etymological deep dive the author takes here is fascinating. The word Leviathan refers to a wreathed animal, a twisting sea monster.
Okay, pretty standard monster stuff.
But it is also figuratively linked in ancient lexicons and concordances to the constellation of the dragon, the constellation we call Draco or Draconis.
Wait, hold on. You are losing me here.
Oh, yeah. Stick with me.
We just went from a metaphorical whisperer in a garden to the literal stars in the sky. How does the author honestly make that leap without losing all academic credibility? The idea that Satan is tied to a constellation sounds like ancient astronaut theory.
It sounds like science fiction if we project modern sci-fi tropes onto it. But if we look at how ancient Near Eastern cultures viewed the cosmos, the leap is deeply historically grounded.
How did they view it?
Ancient minds did not separate the physical stars from the spiritual realm. They mapped spiritual beings, principalities, and angelic powers to the celestial bodies.
So the stars weren't just burning gas to them.
No, the stars were often viewed as the physical manifestations or the actual domains of heavenly hosts.
So they looked up at the constellation Draco, the twisting dragon in the night sky, and they didn't just see a shape, they saw the domain of a specific spiritual entity.
Exactly. And the author embarks on a fascinating speculation about the nature of these angelic races based on this ancient cosmology.
What kind of speculation?
Well, we have this heavily Renaissance-influenced assumption that angels are just beautiful, glowing humans with swan wings playing harps.
Right, the paintings on church ceilings.
But the biblical descriptions of spiritual beings, like cherubim with 4 animal faces or wheels within wheels covered in eyes, are deeply alien and terrifying.
Right, whenever an angel shows up in the text, their first words are always, "Fear not," because whoever is looking at them is usually terrified out of their mind.
They're having a panic attack.
Yeah, because they don't look like humans.
So the source suggests that angels might just be a catch-all functional term for various races of spiritual or celestial beings. Angel just means messenger. It's a job title, not a species.
Oh, wow. I never thought of it that way.
And if God created a vast, multidimensional universe, these beings could be from other realms with entirely different non-human appearances.
Okay, so where does the dragon fit in?
The author theorizes. Could Lucifer, the fallen angel, literally be a draconian being? Could he be associated with the Draco constellation? Could the dragon imagery in the text not just be a metaphor for his cruelty, but a literal description of his celestial, non-human appearance?
So the argument is that Satan might be a literal dragon-like celestial being.
That is the speculative extrapolation the author offers to explain the persistent dragon imagery across thousands of years of different texts.
It definitely explains why the dragon pops up so much.
However, the author immediately grounds this speculation. They state that even if he isn't a literal scaly dragon from a distant constellation, the absolute core of their argument remains.
Jizz.
He's a literal fallen angelic being, The specific anatomy is secondary to the reality of his existence as a living entity.
So whether he looks like a human, a whisper of smoke, or a cosmic dragon, he is real.
Exactly.
He is not a concept. He has form, he has agency, and he has intent, which is a perfect pivot because this isn't just about categorizing cosmic wildlife or studying ancient astronomy.
It leads to a much bigger conflict.
Right. If these dragon-like angels are real, physical beings, and if they have their own kings, and if they have their own agency, well, it explains the most violent and dramatic event described in our sources.
You can't have a king without a kingdom.
And you can't have an army without a war. Which brings us to the climax of this narrative arc for you today, the cosmic war, the dragon versus Michael.
We find this account in the book of Revelation, specifically chapter 12, verses 7 through 11. It describes an event that completely shatters the popular cultural idea of a peaceful, eternal heaven filled with clouds and harps.
It's not a peaceful scene.
War breaks out, specifically in what the text calls the third heaven, which the sources identify as the mountain of God.
The text sets a very visceral, tactical scene here. Michael, who is identified in other texts as an archangel, a prince among the heavenly host, and his angels fight against the dragon and his angels.
So it's army versus army.
Yeah. The dragon fights back, but he loses. And the great dragon, who the text explicitly finally identifies as that old serpent called the devil and Satan, is cast out of heaven and thrown down to the earth, along with his entire army.
Now let's tie this back to the very beginning of our deep dive. Remember the Christadelphian view?
The one about the internal bad code.
Right. The idea that Satan is just a metaphor for the internal sin within a human being. The sources argue that Revelation 12 completely and utterly dismantles the metaphorical view.
How so?
Because you cannot have a tactical military war against a concept. Abstract sin doesn't have an army of angels. An internal human lust doesn't wage a military campaign in the third heaven against Michael, who is a literal named angelic prince.
A concept doesn't have an army. The author is essentially demanding that the reader look at the verbs in the text. They fought, they were cast out, they were overcome.
Those are action verbs.
Exactly. These are physical, logistical actions requiring physical agents. This has to be a physical or at least a literal spiritual conflict.
It demands literal entities capable of organization, rebellion, and combat. But analyzing this war brings us to the ultimate theological stakes presented in the sources.
The stakes get even higher.
They do. The war in heaven forces a resolution to the debate surrounding the identity of Lucifer and Satan, and whether they are the same entity.
Let's unpack this carefully because the timeline of who fell when and who is who can get very convoluted for people studying this. Is Lucifer the same entity as Satan?
The author notes that some theological schools argue that Lucifer is not Satan. They argue Lucifer is a figure from Isaiah who fell later, while Satan was a separate entity already in the garden.
Okay, two different bad guys.
But if you hold that viewpoint, a massive, catastrophic theological problem arises. If Lucifer and Satan are different beings, and Satan was already in the garden as the tempter before Lucifer fell, then it implies that God created a separate being. Satan's for the express, specific purpose of bringing evil into the world.
Oh, because if Lucifer was a good angel who fell later on his own, but Satan was already evil right at the beginning of humanity, God must have just made Satan evil from scratch.
Right. He must have designed him to be the bad guy.
And if God created a being specifically to be evil, to introduce sin, then God is the author of evil. God is the one who coded the virus and intentionally infected the system.
And the author of our sources vehemently rejects this. It violates the core premise of a perfectly good, just creator.
So what is their conclusion to resolve this? How do they avoid making God the author of evil?
The text argues that Lucifer and Satan must be the exact same being. They argue that God created Lucifer as a perfect, powerful, majestic angel, perhaps even a draconian one.
Right, the starry dragon we talked about.
But Lucifer, by his own choice, became filled with pride. Remember Job 41, Leviathan is the king of pride. Lucifer sinned against God out of his own free will.
So it was his choice.
Entirely. He wasn't created evil, he became the adversary. He became Satan. The title shifted when his character shifted.
He wasn't born a snake in the grass. He chose to start whispering lies. So what does this all mean for you, the listener? Why does the timeline of an angelic rebellion and the exact identity of a cosmic dragon matter to how we understand the world today?
It matters because it dictates the justice of the entire universe. If God created Satan specifically to be evil, then punishing him seems deeply unfair.
It would be a rigged game like cosmic entrapment.
Exactly. But if Lucifer was created perfect and chose his path of pride and rebellion, then he possesses true free will. And because he had free will and actively chose malice, God is entirely just in his final judgment.
The final judgment, the lake of fire that we talked about at the very beginning of this deep dive.
Yes. The sources point to Matthew 25.41, where Jesus speaks of the everlasting fire prepared for the devil and his angels.
Prepared for them.
The author makes a crucial point here. The fire was prepared specifically for them. It was prepared for literal, rebellious angelic beings who waged a literal war.
Not for people.
No, it was not originally prepared for human beings. And it certainly wasn't prepared to burn an abstract concept of sin.
You can't burn a metaphor.
No, you burn the Leviathan. The cosmic war ends with God dethroning the king of pride in order to promote a new, just reality.
It is a breathtaking narrative arc when you lay it all out like that. We've gone from a debate about the quiet, internal struggles of the human mind to a whispering enchanter in a garden, all the way to a massive, cosmic, intergalactic war between ancient angelic forces.
It's a wild journey.
We've looked at how a literal interpretation of the grammar, the pronouns in Genesis, the verbs in Revelation, demands that the adversary be a real, living entity with agency, capable of free will, rebellion, and ultimately punishment.
And yet, even in advocating so strongly for a literal being, the texts remind us of the immense power of language.
How so?
Ancient authors used rich, terrifying, culturally resonant metaphors, snakes, sea monsters, dragons, leviathans, to describe the very real, literal actions of these entities. They constantly blurred the line between physical description and spiritual character.
So it can be both.
A literal being can still be described metaphorically to convey the sheer depth of its malice. The text requires the entity to be real for the theology of free will and justice to hold together, but it uses the imagery of the shadow to help us understand the shape of the monster.
It's the difference between knowing a serial killer is a real biological human, but still describing them to your friends as a monster. You know, they don't actually have fur and fangs, but the word monster accurately describes the reality of their actions and the terror they invoke.
The language gives form to the fear.
Well, this has been an incredibly deep dive into a very heavy subject, and I want to leave you, listening right now, with a final lingering thought to mull over as you go about your day, something that builds on everything we've unpacked here today.
I'm curious what this is.
If the entity representing ultimate, literal evil in these ancient texts is described through such varying, terrifying imagery, a whispering enchanter in the grass, a creeping snake, a cosmic dragon, a dark constellation in the night sky, what does that say about humanity's innate need to give a physical face to the unseen forces we fear the most?
Wow.
Even when we believe the evil is a real, literal being with agency, why do we so desperately need it to have scales?
It is a fascinating question. It really speaks to our deep psychological need to see the shadow before we can feel equipped to fight it.
It really does. Thank you for taking this journey with us today. Keep questioning the things you read, keep looking closely at the grammar of the arguments around you, and keep diving deep.
Thanks for joining me on this Explainer podcast today. Keep questioning what you read. Keep seeking the Creator's truth.